Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA. First, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitor is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 750 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's ethics and compliance program, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com. In this episode of This Week in FCPA, the Astros March to the World Series edition, we take a look at two different aspects of conflict of interest and follow Matthew Stevenson's questions: when conflict of interest can get people killed, what is the last mile of finance and how is it achieved? Two ex-Credit Suisse bankers are set to testify in the massive Mozambique tuna boat corruption case. The French Anti-Corruption Agency issues guidelines for travel and entertainment. Were Wells Fargo fraudulent account tactics used by AT&T? We take a look at an article by Jacqueline Jagger on this. Richard Bestrong explains what channel stuffing is, how he used it to make his numbers when he was in business, and why it's accounting fraud. Why is it time for boards to revisit their compliance obligations? We explore that. The Doobie Brothers head this year's nominations for the 2020 inductees into the Hall of Fame. And we conclude by reviewing a 5-part podcast series that I posted this week featuring Jay Rosen in a sponsored series by Affiliated Monitor, where we explore the ethical culture in a corporation. These and other stories all on This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist and the voice of compliance, back again with Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors, for another episode of This Week in FCPA, episode 176, the Let's Go to Doral edition. Jay, as the Astros continue their inexorable march to the World Series, and we contemplate going to Doral to play some golf and maybe see some famous people. We also have the Doobie Brothers nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. More on that later. What are some of the top stories that caught your eye this week?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that we have to discuss here. I think with it being Thursday now that we're taping this show, there is a lot to be said about how this administration decides to use hotels for global conferences and conventions. So why don't we jump right into that one?
So obviously the announcement today that Trump is bringing the G7 to his hotel, the Doral resort, is a huge conflict of interest. I think by definition this violates the emoluments clause. Mick Mulvaney tried to claim that, well, he was doing it at cost, but I guess he hasn't read the Constitution recently because there's nothing in it about being paid and making a profit. So, but we'll leave the emoluments clause and its repercussions for perhaps another discussion, because what we wanted to focus on was a couple of articles around conflicts of interest. And the first one comes from Jeff Kaplan in his appropriately named Conflict of Interest blog, where he cites to a paper by Sunita Shah of Cornell Business School around conflict of interest disclosure. And she posits in her academic paper that while most companies feel that the disclosure of a conflict of interest is in and of itself sufficient, it's really not, because if you allow senior leadership and management to have a conflict of interest, that communicates to all employees the culture of your company, which obviously is that conflicts of interest are not something to be avoided, and certainly leads to evidence of lack of business ethics. In a much more disturbing article, Jay, we had from Matthew Stevenson over on his great blog, the Global Anti-Corruption blog. And he's a professor at Harvard, and he tends to look at things from a policy perspective. Unlike myself, who I try to write about the nuts and bolts of compliance and compliance-related topics, Jay, you take on things really from the Mr. Monitor perspective in your ever-burgeoning writings for corporate compliance insights. But Matthew Stevenson posits if you don't think conflicts of interest matter, think about the Kurds. And the importance there is that Trump made a decision to abandon the Kurds simply because of the business interests he has in Turkey. I don't know whether Erdogan put pressure on him or threatened to close down the Trump Hotel, but even Trump admitted in December 2015 he had a conflict of interest in Turkey because he had a major building there. And that it's pretty clear he made his decision since he did not consult any foreign policy experts and indeed made the decision without telling anyone or even consulting anyone that he was going to order a pullout. That's led to catastrophic consequences, not only for the U.S. military, but slaughter of the Kurds, many of Kurds as Syria invaded. Although a ceasefire has been announced, it's pretty, I guess we have to say irony is dead, as the administration announced that through their great work, they've been able to broker a ceasefire on a war that they started or at least green-lighted. So conflicts of interest matter. And the today's announcement of the G7 going to Trump's business hotel, the Doral resort, is about as clear a conflict of interest as one could have. And this certainly would not be allowed in a corporation, nor should it be, because as I indicated, it's just indicia of a culture of corruption. So it's really pretty disheartening, Jay, and I'm not quite sure where this is going to go forward. So what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that every day we have a news cycle that feels like 2 weeks. And, I would never want to wish for this government not to be working the way it's supposed to work. But my heart goes out to the servicemen and women who defend our country. And I can't believe the position that they've been put in by being abandoned by their commander-in-chief, so to speak. And, I'm just wondering, when is somebody going to step up? That there have been so many people within this administration who have refused to take actions that they know are illegal, or, offered to step away or get fired rather than do something. And I'm just wondering how much closer we need to get to the fire now. This confrontation between the Turks and the Kurds is horrible. And I would think that if I was somebody who had competing interests to the United States, like a man who's riding a white horse in the snow, now would be the time to strike. So I'm definitely glass half empty on this one.
So perhaps we can move to some less morose topics, Jay, because we did have some other very interesting articles. I was intrigued by a concept called the last mile of finance. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is really interesting. This brings me back to my days of working in the financial printing business and doing data sites for Merrill Corporation. This article comes to us from French Caldwell and the Analyst Syndicate, and he talks about back in the old days before technology, if you were getting ready to put together your quarterly finances, what you would have to do is take all your analysts and everyone on the fin team and book out a hotel for 2 weeks. And if you made a change on page one, you'd have to walk down the hallway and basically make sure that everyone else on the team got that change. In terms of this now, when he talks about the last mile of finance, there's a way now that if you use the Workiva suite and you make one change, it automatically flows through to the rest of the stuff you're working on. So he's basically saying that the last mile of finance is really the most congested part. And if you're able to take these changes and flow them through on your quarterlies and on your annual filings, that what is to stop the rest of your GRC team from using this portfolio of tools to try to bring everyone on the same page and potentially use the AI capabilities of the Workiva suite to get everyone connected on that last mile of finance. So I thought it was an interesting story. And like I said, it reminded me of my days back at Merrill.
So, Jay, the thing that intrigued me about this story was twofold. One was exactly what you've detailed. But then also, I think if you talk to any senior level compliance practitioner, they will tell you its execution is where the rubber meets the road in compliance. And that French's article really speaks to the execution of a best practices compliance program. And the Workiva tool allows revisions, but documented revisions with an audit trail. So we've got the document part, and we do have an audit trail part, but it's doing it in a simultaneous manner. And it struck me that it's a concept that I think we need to think about from the compliance perspective, because oftentimes one change may be made in a compliance program or on a focus of a compliance program, but it doesn't get cascaded through the rest of the organization. So that last mile of finance, that last mile of execution, I think if you talk to anyone at Amazon or a major retailer who delivers product, they say the last mile of delivery is also always the most difficult. So that's maybe a concept that we could either one or both of us could talk about a little bit in compliance and really help to bring some innovative techniques and tactics from other disciplines into the compliance field.
Sorry, I was going to say, in our never-ending look across the globe, I think you have another installment of banks behaving badly.
Well, it's really more than banks behaving badly here, Jay. This was just a terrible scandal. This is the Mozambique tuna boat scandal that we've talked about in the past. And in that scandal, government officials and other corrupt individuals conspired to defraud the people of Mozambique by expropriating $2 billion in bonds that were going to be raised to build a fleet of tuna boats. Frankly, I'm sure Charlie and his brethren are happy that they weren't built, or Charlie the tuna for those who don't know what that cultural reference is. Nevertheless, what happened was that bribes were allegedly paid to Mozambique officials, and then the money was purloined by an individual, Mr. Jean Bustani, a former executive at the shipbuilder Privenest Group. And he claims that it was all just a mistake. Someone really didn't understand what was going on. The problem for him and the banker tie is that two former Credit Suisse Group AG bankers will testify in the United States this week describing their roles in this $2 billion kickback scam. Andrew Pearce, who headed the group's global financing group in the bank's London office, and his former assistant, Datlina Subova, who will both testify that they were paid bribes of approximately $200 million, I believe, and that $50 million was paid to government officials in Mozambique, and $12 million was paid to co-conspirators at Privenest. So a huge scandal, a huge corruption case. It's going to be interesting to see if the government can get a conviction out of this, and if they can, I think it's a really very positive sign of the U.S. going after corruption wherever they find it with whatever laws they can.
So next up, we've got an article that comes to us from JD Supra, taking a look at the French anti-corruption law, which is known as Sapin 2, and it comes to us from a team of attorneys at White & Case. I'm going to take a shot at these names: Ludovic Malgrain, Jean-Pierre Picat, and Jean-Louis Salah. So basically, the French Anti-Corruption Agency, which is known by the acronym AFA, has published a draft on Guide on Gifts and Invitation Policies. So basically, this is a soft law, and they've got it out right now to get comments back from people in the ethics and the compliance community. And this draft guide explains how existing law, gifts, and hospitality practices in the corporate world by identifying the types of conduct such policies should aim to prevent. So it's a lot of the same things that we look at here in the States in terms of gifts, travel, and entertainment. And effectively, they would like this to be implemented with eyes on the need to set tone from the top, which we talk about a lot, and also training managers and other employees on the policy to create awareness. So when they are in a situation where they may be taking a vendor to dinner or they might be doing something else, that they really understand that how these policies should affect the way they conduct business, especially in a sales perspective. So it's an interesting article, and we do link to it in the show notes. It looks like next up now, I've got the article, which is a dynamo from our colleague Jacqueline Jaeger over at Compliance Week. And this title of the article is AT&T may be the next Wells Fargo, and it doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. So this all comes to, I guess, rears its ugly head based on a securities class action complaint in AT&T/DirecTV Now securities litigation. And DirecTV Now was a streaming service that DirecTV introduced and AT&T rolled out with it. And basically, the product was not very successful. And there seems to be a lot of direction coming from upper management about how they should push this piece of technology and how they would sign people up unbeknownst to them. And then 3 months later, when the trial was over, take it away. Jacqueline goes in and she takes a look at sections of the AT&T Code of Conduct and policies and procedures and talks about how they should, be an ethical company. And a lot of times these things are very aspirational, but they don't really work out in the wash. And she goes on to detail 3 specific schemes about how people were being given this services without, even signing up for them. So it's really does look like Wells Fargo Redux. Tom, what kind of points did you want to pull out of this?
So, first of all, it was a great piece by Jacqueline. If this all is correct, AT&T could literally be in a world of hurt. And this is in allegations and a lawsuit, so it's just allegations. But it's a clear disconnect, Jay, between what top management says and what top management has in place and the facts on the ground. And I gave a speech yesterday where I talked about culture must connect those two things. And you must have a connection with what your leaders are saying with what is actually happening on the ground. And that is a huge indicia of culture. And right now, Wells Fargo is the best example of a disconnect in that around culture when John Stumpf, the former CEO, sat up before Congress and said, well, this was just a few bad actors. And we fired 5,000 people for violating our policy when there had been whistleblower complaints literally for years about this. And it had been hidden from the board of directors. So I think it's one we're going to have to follow, and it's going to be interesting to see. Every time you think, Jay, or at least every time I think there can't be a bigger scandal, well, there's the next bigger scandal. So
I guess that's what keeps us on the internet, right? So an appropriate story from our colleague Richard Bistrong. This comes to us from the FCPA blog, and it's called "That's No Shortcut it's accounting fraud. Why don't you let us know what Richard has to say about channel stuffing?
So it was really interesting. Richard talked about his engagement in accounting fraud when he was in business to really point out that, talk about, as an entree, I should say, into the fine paid by Fiat Chrysler of $40 million. Fiat Chrysler had a cookie jar, and when they wanted vehicle sales to appear better than they were, they would dip into the cookie jar to inflate sales. And he correctly points out this is exactly what it is, channel stuffing. For those not aware of channel stuffing is when on day near the end of Q1, so Q1, you sell X amount of product to a distributor or other third party. 2 days later in Q2, you buy back that product, usually at an uplift because you have to pay someone for the trouble. Nevertheless, you take that product back or you zero out that sale. And if what Richard had really was a way to hide that sale from the internal audit function at his company so that they didn't see it, or even worse, as he notes, is that if support functions are aware of it and turn a blind eye to it. So that it's an old, honored technique. It is also illegal, and this is what Fiat Chrysler got in trouble for. Jay, if you'll think back a few years back to the HP Hewlett-Packard FCPA enforcement action, this is one of the ways that they created a pot of money to pay bribes, and it was advanced channel stuffing. And literally, sale at the end of Q1, purchase of product back in Q2 with an uplift. Actually, what they did was sale of product in Q1 to distributor one, resell product in Q2 to distributor 2, and on down the line, each time with an uplift. And then eventually Hewlett-Packard bought back the product, also at an uplift, but they didn't keep the money for themselves. They all put it into a pot of money to pay bribes. So it can be a way to create a pot of money to pay a bribe. It can be a fraud. It can be a way to make your accounting numbers. And kind of kudos to Richards for talking about that from his personal experience of how he engaged in it when he was in the corporate world.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more point that he makes that I found really interesting. He said that if you're in audit and compliance and surrounding the end of the month, it's a real good time to walk the floor and see how many people are getting last-minute orders out and looking at salespeople. So you really can tell a lot in terms of what's happening by your employees. And I'm sure if you have a speak-up culture, those folks who are on the floor and see and hear a lot would be able to give you some good information. Last article we have comes to us from the Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance and Financial Regulation. It's from a group of our colleagues over at Deloitte, led by Robert Biskup, Krista Parsons, and Robert Land. And they are just thinking that, is it time to have a refresher course on board oversight? They refer to a case that I believe we've spoken to in the past, which is called Marchand versus Barnhill. And it's about a company that made a single product, ice cream. And if the ice cream was tainted and was not saleable anymore, they lost their only product. They would have to lay off their workforce. And basically what came down to this, that it was the responsibility of the board to be aware of whether or not there was any risk within this company. Robert and his team take a look at just refreshing us in terms of what things a board needs to be aware of in terms of an ethics and compliance and risk posture. And some of the things which are themes that we talk about is, for the company's top leaders, does the board of director and executives set the tone for the rest of the company? Is there actual compliance expertise on those who serve with the board of directors? Has the board held executive or private sessions with compliance and control functions? And should prosecutors address whether those responsible for compliance have sufficient autonomy? there are a couple figures that they look at in a study that shows, unfortunately, that there are not a lot of companies where your ethics and compliance people either participate in the board meetings or participate in the compliance audit function. So it's a very brisk article, but it just is a good reminder that when you're looking for the expertise on your board, or you are going through the year, that these are the types of risks that people should have their eyes open for. As Tom said earlier in the podcast, we have the nominations for the next class in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Tom already cast his vote for the Doobie Brothers. Anyone else that you think is meritorious of joining the Hall?
Well, Whitney Houston is nominated posthumously, and I'm sure she will get in. She was really big and great in the late 80s and early 90s. Her rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner in the, I believe, 1991 Super Bowl, although I may have that year wrong, was perhaps the greatest rendition of Star-Spangled Banner I've ever seen. I would frankly put her in just for that. Obviously, we lost her way too early. The groups that I really hope make it include Nine Inch Nails, Todd Rundgren, Kraftwerk, and for those true rock and roll aficionados into the weeds, Detroit's MC5. But the Doobs are one of my favorite group. I always check them out. And one of the things that the Hall of Fame has to decide is which members of the group will be a part of the induction ceremony if they are
still alive.
No, not still alive, if the group gets in. So with the Doobies, it will include Tom Johnstone, lead guitarist, Patrick Simmons, guitarist, John McPhee, John Hartman, Mike Mosak, Skunk Baxter. Yes, Jeff Skunk Baxter was a part of the Doobie Brothers. Keith Knudsen, Kieran Porter, and Michael McDonald, although Michael was not part of the original iteration. He came on board after he played with Steely Dan. So vote early and vote often for the Doobie Brothers. You can vote as many times as you want, but you can only vote once daily. So hopefully this will give you an excuse to revisit the Doobs.
So I synced up with some of the choices. My choices were Pat Benatar, who was also very big in the 80s, Dave Matthews Band, Depeche Mode, the Doobie Brothers, Nine Inch Nails were together on Trent Reznor. And I don't know, lately, the last couple of years, I've just been a real T-Rex fan. I just cannot get over Bang a Gong, and I think that there's something there that is worthy of recognition. So now we get to your favorite time of the podcast, because in a few hours, Game 4 of the American League Championship Series will begin, and your hometown Astros are up 2-1.
We are. Zach Greinke takes the mound in Yankee Stadium. Garrett Cole pitched just a masterful performance. So if you're an Astros lover, Yankee hater, or anyone else, we invite you to jump on board the Astros Express as we continue our march towards bringing the World Series championship trophy back to Houston. For those interested, Game 1, Tuesday, I will be in attendance when the Astros begin their fight with the Washington Nationals. So for those who may not have listened in, I had a great 5-part podcast series with Jay, of all people, this week. And it was sponsored by Affiliated Monitors. And we took a look at ethical culture. So on Monday, we looked at what is an ethical culture. Tuesday, factors influencing ethical culture. Wednesday, the role of the CCO. Today was assessing ethical culture. And on Friday, the 18th, the role of ethical culture in an overall ethics and compliance program. posts on the FCPA compliance report, but also available on JD Supra, iTunes, Megaphone, YouTube, Spotify, and of course, the Compliance Podcast Network. Jay, you want to tell them about our next episode of Popcorn and Compliance?
Yeah, so we've been on the sidelines a little bit, and Tom and I got that hankering to get together again. So we are going to have a series of episodes of Popcorn and Compliance focused on the Star Trek feature films. So the first one that we're going to bring to the air is Star Trek the Motion Picture. Tom's going to talk about some compliance lessons. I'm going to give my usual Hollywood insider's view, and we're going to talk about where that lays in the pantheon of the Star Trek universe. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and that's going to post on this Saturday, October 19th, 7 a.m. Central Time. So I think we've had a jam-packed half hour or so. Tom, do you probably need to start getting ready for that ball game, huh? On behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist and the biggest Houston Astros homer, and myself, Mr. Monitor, we would like to thank you for joining us for This Week in FCPA, episode 176, for the week ending October 18th, 2019, the Let's Go to Doral edition. Thanks for listening, and we'll speak with you next week.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions, you can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Check out the great articles that we referenced in this episode. They're all listed in the show notes. This Week in FCPA is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week.